everyone. You're watching Tidal Flooding Talk. We are brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition and Triax 57. I'm here with my co-hosts, Joe Martucci and Dan Skeldon, and we have a very special guest tonight. Joe, would you do the honors of introducing him?
Absolutely. So maybe to Palma's disgrin, we have a third meteorologist here today. But I think Palma likes all of us meteorologist people. We have Eric Hoeflich from the National Weather Service here in Mount Holly, New Jersey. He is joining us today to talk about coastal flooding. He is the coastal flooding coordinator for the area. And, for the Coastal Coalition, the National Weather Service covers all of the counties that we serve. I think there's only one town that's not covered by the Mount Holly National Weather Service. It's the office in New York, in Upton, New York, and that's Clark, New Jersey. So we'll have to get the New York office on. But for now, we have Eric on. He's great. He's a friend of mine, and we're really happy to have you on here today, Eric. Thanks for joining us, especially on short notice. We appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm certainly outnumbered. But Eric, I always ask my fellow meteorologists here, Joe and Dan will say so also, but what inspired you to be a meteorologist? Because from my experience, everyone that I have asked, they knew when they were like 5 years old that they wanted to be a meteorologist. So do you share that, or do you have a different?
Yeah. So I actually really got into meteorology with Hurricane Sandy and the impact it had on the New Jersey coastline. I was a sophomore in high school at the time, and my grandparents have a house down in Ocean City, and I remember preparing for that, and I've spent my summers down there, and just kind of preparing the house for that, and kind of seeing that such extreme event and the job the Weather Service did in the National Hurricane Center, where we had a storm that normally should have gone out to sea, but was captured and came directly into the New Jersey coastline. That really had interested me in weather. And since from that point on, I knew I wanted to go to school for weather, and I knew I wanted to be a meteorologist for the National Weather Service, but particularly at this office, since it is my home office, and I grew up about 10 minutes from here.
And it's pretty cool that you can work, Eric, at your home office, because I know the National Weather Service is kind of like the TV, the broadcast industry, where you got to kind of sometimes go, when you're a low person on the totem pole with a job,
Yeah.
you may end up in Juneau, Alaska, or El Paso, Texas,
Right.
or the fact that you can do it in an area, you love, and an area that you're familiar with, must be pretty rare in the Weather Service these days.
Yeah, for sure. I was certainly lucky that the openings kind of came at the right time in my career, because I did start in the private sector for about 2.5 years before coming to the Weather Service. So it was definitely lucky they had some openings around that point. So yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit more about your role as the coastal flooding coordinator? What does that
Yeah. So we wear a lot of hats here at Mount Holly. We have a lot of weather, so we have kind of different focus areas and teams. Like, for example, we have a winter team, a severe weather team. I'm also the focal point for the marine team. So one of those teams is a coastal flooding team, and I help. I took over for a legend at the Mount Holly office, Dean Iavino. I know Joe knows Dean. He was here since the office's opening in the 90s. He recently retired. So I've kind of taken the lead with that, along with our hydrologist, Ray Croslow. And we kind of work with coastal communities, coastal emergency managers, and we kind of work to educate the public with tidal flooding, because it occurs year round, whether it be in the wintertime with kind of coastal storms, or in the summer or fall with potential tropical systems. So we maintain record keeping. We stay up to date on the latest tools and training for forecasting tidal levels, and I kind of head up the program within our office.
I would be remiss to say too, we also have our most frequent guest, Jim Eberwine, who is also on the coastal flooding team, even I think before Dean. But when I think it's important for the public to know, like, when we, in media, or even the Coastal Coalition, are talking about what we've seen with coastal flooding over the past couple of months, or what our forecasts are from, most, if not all of it, is coming from the National Weather Service, and you're keeping those records. I mean, I message you guys. You guys are probably annoyed with me by a number of times I messaged you about
we enjoy the question.
I tried to bring good questions at least, but
You do, yes.
yeah, thanks. But you really are the definitive source, and our job, we'll say Dan and me specifically, are to disseminate a lot of that information and bring it to the public as well. And we do our own forecasting, but a lot of the data, if not all of it's coming from the National Weather Service. So we appreciate that as well. When it comes to this past winter, we were pretty quiet in the coastal flooding front, and we're very happy for that. We like
Yeah.
that. But just are there numbers you could give us about how quiet this season was?
Yeah. We issue coastal flood advisories whenever there's minor flooding over 3/10 of an inch over the minor threshold. And we have had one coastal flood advisory this year, and that was just for 3 counties, or 2 counties. It was for Monmouth and Middlesex County, and that was earlier this year. The last coastal flood advisory um, for the entire New Jersey coastline was all the way back in November, and that's pretty rare. And it's even been quieter for even major flooding or moderate to even major flooding, which prompted a coastal flood warning. We haven't had a coastal flood warning since all the way back to September. So it's been a quiet year so far. We've actually had more low water advisories than coastal flood advisories. It's been that kind of year.
And Eric, can you just explain what a low water advisory is?
Yeah, so low water advisory is issued from our office whenever um, tide levels around low tide get below net go into the -2 feet mean low or low water, which is the average of the lowest low tide, or I think it's lowest high tide, average, and then so whenever ever hits -2, that could result in some navigation issues in our coastal waterways. We actually had a ship run aground in the Delaware River during one of those low water advisories. Um, so
And
yeah.
it's kind of the opposite, right? I mean, where tidal flooding, you have the persistent onshore winds, that the
Mhm.
low water is kind of the opposite issue, where you have the strong, persistent west, northwest offshore winds. And I think everyone in New Jersey, Pennsylvania knows Delaware, knows how windy a
Yeah.
windy season it's been. And a lot of the time that wind has been blowing offshore.
Yeah, we've certainly had, I think we've had several wind advisories this year. And instead of getting these coastal storms, which result in the piling of water up along the coast, we get these strong fronts that come through. Um, with the strong fronts kind of push the water offshore, and it could take a while for that to kind of recover to near normal levels. That's why it's kind of been so quiet. And we really haven't had any big coastal storms. Delaware and Cape May County have kind of lucked out with the winter storms. The storm track has been further south this year rather than going up the coast. Usually, also, we see higher tidal anomalies during El Nino, but so far this winter, it's either been neutral or even a weak La Nina. So that also has an effect on the lower tidal levels.
Now, do you think it being so mild lately, does that kind of put everyone's guard down a little bit that you've noticed?
A little bit because some tidal floodings, especially around new moon and full moons, can occur on blue sky days. We're not really expecting that coming up, but I've been down the shore where I can see it's a perfectly sunny day, but seeing side streets kind of fill up and become impassable, and seeing some cars and garages inundated, they can happen even on the quietest days. So even if it is kind of quiet and people are letting their guards down, we try to get the message out via like social media, via briefings, things like that, to make sure everyone kind of understands the situation with tidal flooding.
And I
Um,
guess you all, like meteorologists, agree on this because Jim Eberwein was on our show and he had a very similar quote as you with coastal flooding is a year-round threat in New Jersey. So I don't think I've ever met a meteorologist that would disagree with that.
Yeah, it's definitely.
And you said that I think you will have only issued one minor flooding or nuisance flooding
Yeah.
advisory. How would you compare that to prior years around this time? I mean, I don't expect you to know the exact number,
Right.
but how mild it has it been?
This would be very quiet, but we were coming off of 2 seasons that were very active with a lot of tidal flooding. So it's kind of regressing to the mean a little bit, but in terms of, frequency over a long period of time. But it's certainly been quiet overall, even with the kind of the nuisance flooding events. I would say most of our tidal flooding events occur from November to March or April. But we still get those, especially near full moons, where we can still get them in the summertime. So yeah, and then the inevitable tropical system that could come up and during tropical season. So yeah, that's kind of what the challenge is with tidal flooding. There really is no off season, though we are kind of supposed to be in the peak right around now, in the winter time into spring. But yeah, it's been kind of just very quiet. And it's due to the frequency of northwest wind events compared to onshore flow with coastal systems.
Let me just ask this because someone asked me this question on Saturday when I was giving a talk. We're in drought in New Jersey. Does that lack of precipitation have an influence onto the amount of tidal flooding we've seen?
The lack of precipitation is more of it has an impact more on the tidal Delaware River, and on the other side of things, whenever we get large freshwater inundation with a lot of rain amounts, that can enhance tidal flooding, but it's more prevalent on the Delaware River rather than the coastal areas in Delaware Bay.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't really know the answer to that, and I'm glad I asked you.
Yeah,
But
good question.
yeah, that's good to know. Go ahead, Dan. I think I kind of jumped in front of you there.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was going to throw a random question out there too, Eric. National Weather Service is constantly changing, the way they message things. A lot of your statements, alerts, warnings have been more impact based, which have been well received, and the public loves the impact-based messaging. I think it's clear, it's easy to understand. And I know another change is coming where they are getting rid of a lot of advisories and going more warning-based as well. Does that apply to coastal flooding too? Is there going to be any changing with the messaging or the alerts you put out with respect to coastal flooding?
So I haven't heard anything recently. I know the Weather Service is trying to go away from advisories. I'm not 100% sure exactly when that's going to be. It might just be coastal flood statements and coastal flood warnings. But an interesting thing coming up is in 2026, the datums are going to change a little bit. So now you'll see new thresholds for minor flooding, rather than what we see now, where we issue advisory. Because if we were issuing advisories for minor flooding, there would be way too many. So that's why we kind of bumped it up to 0.3. But when the new flooding levels come out in 2026, or later, we'll see about that. Then that's going to kind of change what is minor flooding, what is moderate flooding, and things like that. As far as the products themselves, I'm still not 100% sure what's going to come down the pipe, but it's certainly on the radar potentially of getting rid of the advisories and just doing statements and warnings.
And that change
Let me
in
ask.
threshold is sorry, Joe, that change in
No, no, no.
threshold is
Go ahead,
something
Dan.
that's revisited, kind of like, with the average highs and lows, those numbers are adjusted, every year, every 10 years. So it's like a 30-year average. Same thing with the thresholds, because I think they were raised like maybe 10 years ago as flooding becomes a little more common with the sea level rise. You kind of have to raise them, or else people would have advisory and warning fatigue, right? Because you'd be triggered all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Yep.
Okay.
Now, when you were, oh, sorry, Joe, you go this time. It's your turn.
I just said we have in our chat here. We'll start typing about where we could go. I was going to ask just a basic question, and I should have asked this earlier, and I apologize. But flood stage for people, just in my passing and talking with people, a lot of people go off of the height off of their tide gauge, which is good. However, I think there's still some confusion because if you live in Point Pleasant, well, your number is going to be different than being in Margate, right? So you guys, as the National Weather Service, you equalize this by saying there's minor flood stage, moderate flood stage, and major flood stage. And you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but can you tell us, what can people expect in minor flood stage? What do you expect in moderate flood stage? And what do you expect in major flood stage?
So it's a good question because we get asked this a lot. Minor floods are kind of more nuisance flooding, and it's mainly just low-lying areas and side streets that kind of were built on marshes. Like I see this in Ocean City all the time. It's mainly just, like I said, not really that impactful, and people should, be aware of it, but it doesn't cause significant impacts or significant damage to life and property. Things start to get little more intense with moderate flooding, and then even further with major flooding. Now, moderate probably will close some side streets. Probably will be some inundation on properties and in some water in some garages. While major flooding is probably going to impact main roads, main arteries, and potentially shut down roads, especially near back bays. The back bay kind of communities are where we see the worst impacts rather than oceanside. So when we talk about tidal flooding, it's not, water coming over the dune like with waves from the ocean. It's more coming up from the back bays because water just piles in and then has nowhere really to drain. So those are the areas that we really have to watch, and we really try to message hard. Is that in these moderate to major flood events, you'll likely see several road closures, some water over some properties, yeah, it could result in significant impacts and cut off main roads on the barrier islands.
Right. And I think that the coalition always tries to spread awareness about how minor and moderate flooding can really affect people. And, if you do see a flooded street, just turn around, don't drown, because I think it takes, what, 2 feet of moving water to,
Right.
Carry away a vehicle.
Yeah. And you never
So, I
really
mean, it's
know.
hard to tell. Is that 2 feet? It's just
Right.
better
And you
safe
never know
just to
what's,
turn around.
there could be like a sinkhole or something underneath water. A new product that's kind of helped with the resiliency of coastal communities is now we're working with FEMA for flood inundation mapping, both for tropical and extratropical events that now show emergency managers where exactly inundates during minor flooding, during moderate flooding, or during major flooding. What does that exactly mean, and a good estimate of where exactly areas will flood. So that's a new product kind of we're working on right now, and getting emergency managers educated so they can plan properly when there's a coastal flood warning or a coastal flood advisory. That inundation mapping is very helpful, and there's a version of that being worked on for tidal flooding, but also the bigger project is also for freshwater and river flooding. That's coming nationwide over the next several years. So that is pretty interesting, and it shows what are the real life impacts rather than just saying what are minor and moderate flooding.
Definitely. And you said you do work with emergency managers in communities. And what are some of the recommendations that you give them or feedback that maybe you receive?
Yeah, so I gave a talk in Atlantic City last year for NJEPA, which is kind of a meeting of emergency managers. Sarah Johnson, our warning coordination meteorologist, also does a lot of work with emergency managers, not just at the coast, but everywhere. So what they are kind of looking at, what we're trying to educate them with is that we really haven't had a truly tropical coastal flooding event since Sandy. The last event that was even similar to that was the blizzard of 2016, which produced major flooding, but that was still a foot below what Sandy produced. So as time goes on, we kind of forget what exactly, real major flooding or something of Sandy's level could possibly do. So we're kind of educating them with that, showing them different tools at their disposal, like the flood mapping, and there seems to be a lot of positive feedback from them on that. And of course, we also educate them on our kind of usual products. We do tidal flooding forecasts at least twice a day, and usually more for our. We have 13 tidal gauges that we forecast for that are either in New Jersey themselves or adjacent to New Jersey.
Yeah, it certainly gets concerning when all this time has passed, and I think that I've recently seen how people may forget, not forget, but they kind of don't expect it to happen again anytime soon. Like
Right.
I do work in a construction office, and Someone actually came in today with a permit application for HVAC, and right now the condensers are right on the ground. And I said, okay, you will need to build a platform and build it up. And they asked, like, are you sure? Do I really need to? And it's almost like, did everyone forget
Yeah,
what could happen?
yeah.
Get out
So
of
that's,
harm's way, build it up, build
yeah,
high.
but that's why we kind of document these things, and we have an extensive document of all the historical crests above moderate flood stage. So we kind of keep the records, and kind of say what the impacts would be from prior flooding events.
Yeah, Eric, that's something that I've seen you actually work into warning messages saying, hey, we are expecting levels similar to November 6th, 2003. And that date may not register with like everybody. Not everybody's good with
Right.
dates, but it's nice to put that kind of historical measuring stick, because if you were impacted by that storm and you remember, oh wow, I really flooded during that storm, that is a helpful tool. So the minor, moderate, major is helpful, but the fact that you guys do throw a little historical measuring stick in there, I think definitely helps some residents as well.
Yeah, and we have a lot of people here that really know their weather history, and I would say people at the coast are more so than what who I've interacted with. People at the coast really do have a pretty good memory compared to other just people, the general public overall. They do remember these major flooding events that impacted them, and they really do take it seriously. I see it firsthand, being part of Facebook groups of Ocean City residents. Just kind of, I know they have a specific flooding page, and I see they're always asking when does the advisory start, or what should I do, or something like that. So I do see. I know that's a small sample size and only related to one town, but I do notice, kind of interacting with them and emergency managers, that they are pretty well educated, and do have a very good memory of significant events.
Right, and I guess especially locals, like we are dealing with the mild to moderate flooding. We do see it when we're driving to and from work or to the grocery store, so we do remember
Right.
easily. However, I guess it's also trying to educate people that are not here all the time. And
Right.
that's something that I know the coalition tries to do, and I know the National Weather Service does that as well, and FEMA too. So I think
Yeah.
that is sometimes a challenge, just getting the information out there.
Yeah, and yeah, the summer events are probably some of the most impactful, because these shore towns have 10 times the population they do in the wintertime. So another thing Sarah really does, our WCM, is she provides kind of expertise with hazard mitigation planning. She gave a talk on that in Atlantic City. So that's kind of helping emergency managers prepare for these kind of events. And especially in the summertime, when populations are over 100,000 in some shore towns.
Yeah. Hey, Eric. So looking forward here, the one thing that probably will end up bringing us coastal flooding will be the king tides
Yeah.
that we see. Can you explain what the king tides are, and then when we are expected to see them here in New Jersey?
Right. So the king tides are usually when our highest tides are, regardless of what is going on, and they can be enhanced by things like a coastal storm with onshore flow. But the general idea with king tides, or it's when the Earth, Moon, and Sun are kind of basically lined up, and with that we get higher high tides, but also lower low tides. So we have a pretty high tidal range, and we do have a couple king tide periods coming up. I have it written down here. It's right around with the astronomical high tides. So that's just the high tide before any weather effects. Astronomical high tides are within a half foot of minor flooding, with the new moon on April 27th, May 26th, and with the full moon in October 6th, December 4th, and November 5th. But we also have, just around regular new full moons, astronomical high tides around a foot rather than a half foot, like I mentioned previous ones. So those are the dates that we're really going to kind of keep an eye on, and it wouldn't surprise me if there were any advisories or even warnings, especially if there's an enhancing factor like a coastal storm or a period of onshore flow.
Now,
Yeah.
since I just noticed it's already almost 7:30 here, Where can our viewers find more information from the National Weather Service?
So
Would be useful.
yeah, they can go to weather.gov/PHI. And if they scroll down on our website's homepage, they can find there's a tab that has all the tidal information for all of our forecast points up and down the New Jersey coastline. So there's several, so they're relatively spaced out there, but there's not really any large gaps. And any member of the public can kind of go on there and have a look and see what the tidal forecast is.
Yeah. And we use that title forecast in our web app that we have on the Coastal Coalition for our member towns, where they can see, what the coastal flooding alerts are, where can it flood, and then we have evacuation routes on there, and we work with the local towns on safe places to park. So we do have a couple of towns that are in the National Weather Service, Mount Holly area. We have Longport, we have Commercial Township, and we have about 10 more towns that are close to signing up too. So, we rely on that, just like you guys are protecting the public, that is your mission. We're trying to do the same thing here at the coalition. But Palma's right. My God, it's already 7:28. Eric, any last words for us?
Any last words?
No, but this is a
Not
great
famous last words, because there will be more words from Eric.
This was a great conversation, guys. Thanks for having me on. I love talking about coastal meteorology. Been a Jersey Shore native for a while. Well, I grew up in Delran, but spend my summers and sometimes the best time of the year down the shores in the off season. So especially in September. So
Right.
I definitely enjoy coastal meteorology, and I'm happy to talk about it. We had a great conversation.
Thank you so much for being a guest on our show.
Of course.
Yeah,
The coalition. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to thank you too, Eric. I hope it stays quiet for you. I mean, it's going to be one of the quieter starts to a year ever. And
Yeah.
hopefully the quieter, the more bored you are. I know you got a lot of other stuff on your plate, but the quieter it is with
Let's
tidal
hope for quiet
flooding, the better
tropical
it is
season.
for everybody.
Yep.
And the coalition did form after Sandy, and it was communities that came together looking for guidance from each other. So it is cool to see another, see how everyone is connected, where, Joe and Dan, they're getting a lot of their information from the National Weather Service, and it's all very connected. So that's cool.
Yeah, we have a good relationship with Joe, and we love working with him. So, yeah.
Same back at you, my friend. Always a pleasure chatting with you guys. I'll have to come over to Mount Holly one of these days soon. We'll figure it out. You, me, Alex, the whole gang. Yeah. All right. Palma, you want to take us out for our tidal flooding talk?
Sure. Well, on behalf of the coalition, I also want to remind our viewers, protect your property from flood hazards. Don't let floodwaters damage your property, or worse, put you in danger. Just 2 feet of moving water can carry a car away. Stay aware of flood-prone streets and park on higher ground when heavy rain is in the forecast. And remember, driving through flooded roads is never worth the risk. Turn around, don't drown. And that's all I have for tonight. So I guess we will see each other again next Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Tidal Flooding Talk, brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition and Tri-X 57.